Hello, I'm Bob Cotto, and this is my color head painting DVD. On this DVD, I'm painting in gouache, which is an opaque watercolor media, and I'll be talking about painting from observation, imagination, using gesture, and I'll be also talking about some basic color issues and color theory. So let's go ahead and get started. Take a look at some of these materials that I have here. I've got some synthetic hair brushes. They're brights, meaning that the bristles are just a little bit shorter than flats. Flats are a little bit longer. I've set up my palette on top of a wet paper towel and a piece of tracing paper on top. I've got white, Naples yellow, cad yellow light, cadmium red, burnt sienna, burnt umber, ultramarine blue, some cypress green, or you could use phthalo blue, a cool green, and I have a purple on the palette. Okay, let's talk a little bit about color here. I've got a color wheel set up. And for those of you guys that have never seen a color wheel, this helps us to see how we can use color in seeing light and shadow. Okay, so this all revolves around light source. Okay, so if you have a light source that is a color, like let's say it's sunset, and the color of the light is kind of a yellowish orange, the shadow color will be the direct opposite on the color wheel, which would mean that it would be kind of a blue-purple. Okay, if you have a really strong red light, let's say, like you're standing literally by a red light, the shadow could maybe go more to the green. Okay, so let's mix up some color and let's see how the colors look next to the color wheel. So I'm going to take some yellow. I'm going to mix up a green here. Okay, I'm taking my cadmium yellow and my phthalo blue there, and I'm mixing it up, and it makes a nice pure green. Now, of every color, there is a warm and a cool, and the phthalo blue versus let's say an ultramarine blue. A phthalo blue makes more of a pure green, and the ultramarine blue makes more of a pure purple. Okay, let's see. I'm going to take some ultramarine blue now, and I'm going to mix more of a purple. Okay, I've actually added here on this palette a little bit of alizarin crimson, which is a very cool red that is very close to purple. So as I mix that in with my blue, it becomes a very pure purple. So this is how you get some very pure color. All right. Let's try mixing more of an orange. Take the yellow and the red directly. Nice pure orange. Okay, and familiarizing yourself with your palette enough where as you see color and you can just try to mix it just based on sight, your palette then becomes kind of like your vocabulary. You see things and you interpret it through your palette. So to me, a palette is never really arbitrary. You put colors on that you know will help you see what it is you want to mix. And so consequently, you can take a palette, like even the palette that we're working with here, which is reasonably balanced, and you'll find strengths and weaknesses within it. And depending on what you want to paint or how you want to paint or how you want to see color, because a lot of color is so subjective, you can make adjustments from there, and that's really what I suggest you do. Start out with something pretty balanced like what we have here, and then make adjustments as you go. Okay, you'll find yourself basically designing your own palette after a while. Okay, mixing up more of a pure blue, a true blue, right next to that purple so you can see how much redder the purple is. I find that exercises like this and just seeing what the palette does is very, very helpful when I'm gradating color in my painting. Like, in other words, let's say I have a purple and I want it to gradate into blue. How do you do that? How do you mix the colors together so they integrate? Or from blue to blue-green. See, that phthalo is just a little bit greener, and it makes a little bit more of a true transition to that green there. So we're stepping right around the color wheel here and seeing what some of these colors do in harmony together. We do have some earth tone colors on the palette, like burnt sienna, which is a very, very warm brown. It's like a very dull orange. And we use that as a base color, a starting point. You'll see me use that a lot as we get into painting more of the heads on this DVD. But as we look at some of the pure color here on the palette, you can see how, as I mix around the color wheel here, you can see how the colors really relate to the color wheel, directly relating to our palette. Okay? So, once again, as you pick your own colors, kind of think about this. Can I mix a really good green? Can I mix a really good orange? Can I get more of a blue-green? Okay, because if I didn't put that phthalo blue on the palette, it'd be hard to get that blue-green. Okay, we got the yellow and the red with more yellow, and it's going definitely more to the orange. And that is a direct complement to the blue directly across from it. Okay, there's our pure yellow. And that would be a direct complement to the purple across from it. Okay, pointing out the earth tones there. I've also got some Naples yellow, which is a very dull yellow, which helps us definitely as we get into some of the flesh tones. Okay, I'm kind of mixing more of a dull red there, using the burnt sienna. And that becomes a really good base color when we start working into flesh tones. I had burnt sienna and white, and it's a good starting point. Okay, and you'll see me do that in some of the paintings further along in this disc. Okay, so you can see if I add just a little bit of red and warm it up just a touch. Okay, so if I start with, let's say, burnt sienna and white as a base, as an example, you can mix from that, and you can say, well, I'm going to make it a little warmer to the red or a little bit warmer to the yellow. And if you start with that as a base, all of the color that you mix into it will harmonize. Okay, I'm taking my burnt umber and my ultramarine blue, and I'm making my darkest dark. So there would be, within the context of this palette, my darkest dark. So if I see anything that resembles, let's say, black or something dark, those are the colors I would mix together. And I hesitate, especially when you're learning, putting black on your palette, and just my own personal preference and thoughts here, I'd rather mix it because then I always think of my dark colors and values as a color rather than just always assuming it's black. Okay, I'm taking my burnt umber and mixing it in with the green just to illustrate that burnt umber, even though when you look at it it's brown, it's just a very dull, dull, dull green. Okay, I'm taking my Naples there and I'm mixing it in with my cadmium yellow, just showing what happens when you mix that dull yellow with the bright yellow. And you kind of get this mixture that is a little smoother. And I think that it's, especially when you're painting people, this becomes very, very, very helpful. Okay. So once again, this is kind of like having a whole bunch of vocabulary words, and we'll be able to explain a lot of different things and describe a lot of different things as we see how articulately we can use these colors and these different mixtures to get what it is we want to try to describe. Okay, I'm getting kind of a duller green there with the Naples yellow mixing in. So now, you can see you can get variations. Okay, let's do a painting and let's apply some of this stuff. I'm working right into my sketchbook, which has kind of an oatmeal colored paper. It's very thick, so I can paint into this. Okay, so I'm starting out with a really loose drawing, much like in my other DVDs, where I just start out really fast and loose, some light lines. This is kind of, blocking in really gesturally. I want to try to find the rest of the drawing with the paint, so I try not to put down too tight of a drawing because then I'll just end up filling it in with the brush and it ends up getting very stiff very early. So this is, to me, a big part of the practice is getting the mileage where you feel comfortable going from step to step and discovering things in layers. Okay, so right now I'm just trying to get some proportions down, get some overlapping lines down, which help me find some of the planes when I start painting. But as soon as I kind of get a feel for, well, I know where I'm going, I'm going to switch, and I'm going to start drawing with the average color and value for the shadow side. Okay, the average color and value for the shadow side. So I'm mixing up a value that's definitely darker than the paper. The paper is my starting point. Okay, and this is my average for the shadow, meaning that there will be darker darks within this shadow shape. But for right now, all I'm going to do is I'm going to take this paint here, and I'm going to start blocking in the shadow side, not the light side, not any halftones in the light side, but just the shadow side. So I'm always thinking about, okay, where's my light source? I've designed it coming from the right-hand side, so all the shadows will be on the left. Okay, and I'm drawing now with the shadow. I mean, oftentimes we get caught up with drawing thinking that, oh, drawing is just lines. Drawing is all about lines. Drawing is just making the appropriate mark. So if whatever it is I'm doing, the most appropriate mark is to put down a shadow shape, then I draw with shadow shapes. And that's exactly what I'm doing right now. I'm transitioning this piece from a line drawing lay-in, and at a certain point you might feel comfortable enough where you don't have to put in that line drawing lay-in. You could just start drawing with the shadow shapes. Okay? I'm thinking about my soft edges, meaning where the form turns. So if you look at the forehead and the cheek, notice how I kind of soften those edges just a little bit compared to any cast shadow edges, like, let's say, the cast shadow from the nose onto the cheek. Okay? Like there's a cast shadow edge right there. Okay? Moving into a form shadow edge there on the chin. Okay? And the chin's going to cast a shadow on the neck. There we go. So this color and value wasn't too arbitrary in the sense that, well, I was thinking about, if I want to play warm against cool, warm in the light side and cool in the shadow, and I wanted to make sure it didn't get too dark so that it was truly an average color and value, probably most importantly value, for the shadow side. Okay, so there's my drawing. There he is. He's sitting right there on the page, and I can tell where the light's coming from. Okay. Now I'm going to take a clean but damp brush and just soften some of the soft edges just a little bit more. Okay. Get that soft edge on the bridge of the nose right there, the tip of the nose so it feels round. Okay. And I'll leave the cast shadow edges nice and crisp because that's where light's blocked, and where light is blocked, you have a nice hard edge, cast shadow edge. Okay, so I'm not adding any more paint, I'm just manipulating the paint that's there. So now I'm just blending. It's kind of like when you do a charcoal drawing and you start, rubbing into some of the shadow edges with your finger. It works. It works. I don't deny that. But I think sometimes in paintings get real muddy because we start adding too much paint when sometimes all we have to do is blend the paint that's already there. So this is just a clean but damp brush. I'm just going in and I'm softening some edges and spreading out some of the material that I just put down in my lay-in. Okay? So now it's a nice one-value drawing. Okay? The form turns because I contrasted my edges, meaning that I showed the difference between cast shadow and form shadow edges, and that really helps us to see the light source. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up an average color and value for the light side. I went cool in the shadow, so now I'm going to go warm with the light side. And I'm just taking my burnt sienna and white here, and since I'm making this guy up, I'm just going to put down a real generic warm light side. Okay, so here we go. Average for the light side, meaning that I can envision a lighter light hitting this, but this is the average. Okay, and it's nice working on that toned paper because that toned paper isn't pure white. And so when you're dealing with a value that's not white, something in the middle, it's easier to judge value because value will either be lighter than or darker than that starting value. So if I start on a toned paper like this, or a toned canvas or a board like I'm going to do a little bit later, you'll be able to see that, well, things are either lighter or darker. Okay, it makes judging value a whole lot easier. Okay, so here we go. Now, as you do painting especially, but this is true of drawing too, be careful as you bring up your painting, as I'm doing right now. Don't be overly critical. It's always about making adjustments. So, somebody walks up to your painting while you're working on it, and you might get a little shy about it, like, oh, don't look at that, it doesn't look so great. It's underpainting, okay? You're still bringing it up. It's practice, okay? My old department chair when I was going through art school, I remember he told me a story that for years he felt a little bit apprehensive having people come into his studio while he was working on pieces because he felt like they only looked good in the last 20 minutes. Then it dawned on him that only in the last 20 minutes did it actually look finished. It's like judging anything before it's finished. You know, I would only eat food if it was fully cooked, I suppose. When you put it that way, it makes more sense, but I think that this is about process in that, well, I'm building up the painting, okay? It's going to happen in stages. So you kind of take each stage for what it is. Average for the shadow, average for the light side. Okay, now that we've got those down, let's start accenting some dark. So now I'm going to start spreading out my value range, and I'm going to say, well, you know, there's my average, but where would be the darker darks? Now, I'm not going to repaint everything. Now it's about accenting. I have to make some decisions. I have to think about where the form is turning. Okay, and this is also going to help us to see detail on that shadow side. Okay, nostrils, very important. There you go. Okay, I'm just starting to indicate, and I'm always thinking about my edges, so I'll come right up against those cast shadow edges. Just accent. Okay, notice how I'm drawing with that upper lid gesture. Okay, in other words, I'm not painting in all the detail of the eye. The main thing that I want to do right in the beginning is just get that cast shadow from the upper lid onto the eye, and that really gives us the gesture. Okay, now I'm just, also as I'm putting down these darks, I'm just getting material down onto the page, okay? And once again, I can always take a clean, damp brush and soften some of these edges and soften some of these transitions. Come back in and just kind of blend what's there, see? Just blending what's there. Creating some soft edges right where the eyebrow turns in, at the bridge of the nose there a little bit. But notice how I'm leaving that cast shadow edge. Leave that nice and crisp. Find that this step tends to just soften it just enough. Now, in opaque painting like this, and you can look at, let's say, oil painting, acrylic painting, you know, gouache painting as we're doing right now, which is an opaque watercolor. We're working from dark to light. Dark to light. So notice I drew with my shadows first. I didn't start with my highlights. Okay? I didn't start with my highlight value in the light side. I started with the average value for the light side, so I could build up to my highlights. Okay, so it's this building process. The last word in the painting, and what should read last, are the highlights. So what I'm doing right now is I'm refining the foundation of the picture. I'm refining the foundation of this head painting, where I'm putting down value and I'm working over it, whether I'm giving depth to the shadows I'm doing right now, or I'll build up to highlights. Okay, so there we go. We've got some depth in the shadow, and it's starting to work already. Okay, but certainly we want to keep making our adjustments here. All right. Okay, let's start adding just a little bit of color. Now, when you're putting color into the face like this, you think about it, okay? Now, highlights are pretty light, okay, which means you're going to be adding some white. If you overdo that, the head gets really chalky looking. Okay, so how do you keep color in there and you maintain your highlights? Well, it's understanding where the color is. And the color exists in the halftone. Halftones are areas in the light side that aren't highlight. And so when you think about right where the form just about turns a shadow, right where I'm painting right now, that's right where the form is bending away from the light, and that is where you're going to see the most color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some color in some of these areas before I highlight. Okay, the ears, it's kind of bending away anyways. The cheeks, classic, rosy cheeks. This guy looks like he wants rosy cheeks. Oh, I'll give him some red. Okay, right in through there. So otherwise he was looking a little bit pale. Okay, right there in that far cheek, add a little bit of color. Right there in the chin. Just before it turns, just before it goes to shadow. That's where we're going to see the color. And once again, I'm still building it up. I'm building it up. Sometimes when I'm painting, I kind of feel like I'm making a building. It's got form, it's got structure, but these early stages, I really feel like I'm building the foundation, And if the foundation is nice and strong, it's not the part that, wins the big architectural awards, but the structure that will win the architectural award is built on top of that foundation. So I have to do a good job of building up my foundation so that when I get to those highlights, they'll really read. Okay, I'm adding a little bit of a cool cast tone down here to give them a little bit of a 5 o'clock shadow. Just making a subtle adjustment. Basically mixing up the same value but cooler. Same value but cooler. Now, as you progress through and you start drawing and you get into painting and things like that, well, it's pretty simple in my opinion. Drawing is the most important thing. And drawing, once again, isn't just lines, but it's understanding the shapes and how everything blocks together in perspective and proportion. And, even if you want to exaggerate it, that way you're intending to exaggerate it and you can, come up with ideas based on what you're thinking rather than always running into the same problems and protecting yourself from what you don't know, always venturing forward and just trying to explore, based on, always seeking out more knowledge. Okay, so drawing is the most important thing. A very close number 2 would be value. Okay. A distant number 3 is color. Because with good drawing and good value, we can make up all the color and it'll still work. But if you want the color to read in a realistic way, okay, then you have to study from observation. And I think that a lot of what we see out there is the good stuff has been built on really good mileage based on observation. So keep that in mind, that even with what I'm showing you with the DVDs, it's going to take some practice and practice seeing and doing. Okay, a lot of seeing and doing. Okay, now I'm starting to build up to my highlights here. Okay, I've built up my foundation of value, and I'm ready to start putting in some highlights. Okay, first one I do is that highlight on the nose. Give them a little bit of form. Automatically, boom, that starts to read. But notice, I did not do that first. I'm saving this to the very end. I'm highlighting right up against my cast shadow edges. Okay, always reminding myself that the light is coming from the right-hand side. Light is coming from the right. So understanding shape, understanding light source, this stuff all makes a big difference. So as I bring in my highlights, I kind of know where I'm going. And I'm not going to paint over everything. I'm going to just paint into what I had. Okay, so I'm building up my highlights. I'm getting material down so that I can soften some edges and actually blends together some of the paint that's already there. Okay. So as you can see, as I'm bringing up the painting now, with the highlights, pretty much all the stages are now in play. Figure I started by painting in the average color and value for the shadow. Okay, and I mapped out all of the form first. Okay, and then I put in the average color and value for the light side. Okay, then I had the average and the average together. And then I went for my darker darks in the shadow, which immediately gave me depth to the shadow. Okay, I started adding some color into the halftone, meaning the areas that aren't highlight, right where it's bending away from the light, that's where the real pure color is going to be. And then my final step is I started adding in some of the highlights and get the material down on the board or on the page and start using a damp brush like I am right now and just kind of blend things together. Okay. Work back in, touch up a few highlights. Once you get through all those stages, all those steps, Then the whole thing's kind of live, open game. You could touch up the shadows, touch up the halftones, bring the highlight back up like I'm doing right now. I always like to kind of start these paintings really fast and loose and just keep it gestural, keep it fresh, because I know that depending on what it is I want to do, I can always slow down. And if I wanted to, I could spend as long as I wanted on a painting and just keep slowing down, cleaning it up, touching it up, touching it up, making little adjustments. I might start with an average value and an average value, which is 2 values, and in the end I might have 1,000 values down. Okay? Or I might start it the same way and just do it in one sitting like I'm doing right now. And just practicing going through the steps, practicing seeing the form, practicing trying to describe my hard and soft edges and where to put my color in the halftones. If you've never worked with gouache, it's a very, very fun medium. It's very forgiving, very forgiving. I know that when I was going through art school, we used gouache in design classes where we painted color swatches and things like that, and it scarred a lot of my friends where they never wanted to touch gouache again. That's one way to use gouache. Gouache is a beautiful medium. It's got a lot of pigment, and it's basically an opaque watercolor. So it's really easy to use. If you just have something to paint on, a piece of board or a piece of thick paper like this, you can paint right over it. All you need is a brush, a little bit of water, bucket of water. That's what is out of your view here. It's just my little bucket of water. And some gouache paint and something to mix on. You can mix right on I used to mix right on an old dinner plate that I had found somewhere and would wash it off when I was done using it, just use it for my palette, and I would use it for watercolor and gouache, and it worked out pretty well. I'm using a metal ceramic tray here that is really nice, but you don't have to use anything like that. It's a very forgiving media, and it's a great way to practice mixing color and blending some of these edges and building things up with paint. If at some point you decide to try, let's say, oil painting or acrylic painting, understand that most of all these things that I'm showing you will directly apply directly across. Okay, at a certain point, painting is just painting. You make little adjustments. Acrylic dries really fast. Oil, you have to really think about, how to dispose of all the thinners and things like that. That's why I really wanted to just get you guys started with gouache, just because I think that it's forgiving and it's really pretty fun. Okay, I'm just touching them up, softening a few edges. You can see how the color reads in the halftone. Just look at where the transition to shadow is, right before the shadow. That's really where I put the color in. Look at his chin there. See how it gets just a little bit warmer right there, just before it goes to shadow. Okay, if you just look at the highlights, they are chalky because there is a lot of white. But if you want to gain that range of value, it's sometimes hard to avoid. The only way, really, is to understand where the color really is. Okay, just making little touch-ups here. A little depth to the shadow in the ear there. And he's just about done. A little touch-up. Yeah, softening a few edges right in through there. All right, taking a quick look, seeing if there's anything I want to adjust. And that color in the halftone compared to the highlight. Okay, nice halftone color there. Okay. I think that just about does it. Okay, let's do another one. Now I'm going to work up my drawing here on a whiteboard, keeping it loose and gestural. Start with my vertical measuring on the shape. Try to find the nose, which always acts as a rudder for the head. Wherever the nose is pointed, it really tells me where the front of the face is. I'm keeping it deliberately very loose because I know that in painting, I'm going to paint over this. And trust me, I've made this mistake before. I put in a really, really cool-looking drawing, and then I like the drawing so much that I'm afraid to paint into it, and I'm afraid of wrecking it. But it's the foundation of the painting. And you have to basically know that, well, it's a step, and I'm going to paint over it. So it's a step. You have to continue the drawing with the painting. So I got my drawing down, and I can kind of see where I'm going. It's not completed. Now I'm going to complete it with the paint. All right, let's adjust our view here so you guys can see some of the mixing and stuff. Okay, I got all my colors out. I even add a little bit of yellow ochre this time, just as a bridge. Sometimes you add a color just because it makes things a little bit easier. Okay, I'm mixing up a pretty good dark here. I'm going to draw in all my shadows. I'm going to draw in all the shadows here. So this way, it's a little bit more of a detailed drawing. I mean, it's not just a line drawing, it's a drawing of shape. And these shapes will help us to see the form and really develop the painting as we go. I mean, like an easy shape is the hair. The hair is a shape. How about that? Just put it in as a value. Don't worry too much about it. It creates a shape. With these shapes, we can see the perspective of the head. Okay. I'm just kind of continuing my drawing here with that dark. Okay, a little bit of a shadow there on the chin. Okay, just get the shoulders in there just a little bit. Okay. I've been teaching classes where we draw or paint heads for quite a while, and you know, when I'm painting like this, my fun is I take a lot of liberties. I start messing around with the gesture and the proportions and things like that, and that's the fun part for me. But I never forget that I learned how to draw everything in proportion. I learned about perspective. I learned about a lot of all that stuff, really. And I talk about them in my classes like I'm talking to you guys about them right now. And that it's kind of like understanding your instrument. You know, if you can play, let's say if you're a jazz musician and you can play your scales in your sleep, you can just play them inside and out. Well, you can improvise then really naturally because it's become a language to you. Okay, what I'm doing here is I'm taking some transparent burnt sienna, just really thin down, and I'm just washing over that drawing to get rid of the white of the board. And this is going to help us to judge value and bring up our painting. Okay, so I just basically put a big filter over him. Okay, it also helped some of that drawing that I just did kind of bleed a little bit and soften, and it's going to make it a little bit easier to work into. Okay, I think as you progress through the painting, the strategy is I'm going to fix the last step. You know, one step leads to the next step, which leads to the next step, and you just kind of keep adjusting it and fixing it. Okay, so we have a good starting point now. It started with a line drawing with a pencil, then drawing with shadow, and now we have that tone in there, and we can really start to see where we could possibly put some lights and darks, and some warms and some cools. Okay. My first steps, I always like to go for the big shapes. So I'm going to plop in the background. Now, I kind of picked kind of a neutral medium tone here. That's a little bit to the cool. okay? And I did that on purpose. I want to get that cool in there in the back so that the warmth of the face will pull forward, okay? And even with just that little burnt sienna wash, you're going to see a really good separation of the face to the background, okay? So it's a real simple relationship of back to front, warm against cool. Okay, but it's going to help us. I mean, and my feeling is any of the easy stuff you could do to help, you do it. Okay, and you get it in there and get it in right away so it'll help you make decisions. Because painting's all about decision making. You know, I just said you're going to make adjustments as you go the whole time. You're always correcting it. Those are decisions. It's all about the decision making. Yeah, so my cousin, he's an optometrist, and I remember he told me that this famous jazz pianist came into his office and wanted an eye exam and, you know, get some glasses and stuff. And my cousin's a huge jazz fan. He's a really cool guy. And he was just thrilled to have this guy in his office. And he started talking to him, and he started asking him all these questions. And the guy just loved talking about his work. And they talked for quite a while. And my cousin was telling me that he asked him, he said, so how often do you practice? And he goes, I practice every day. I play every day, 7 days a week. I never miss a day. He goes, wow, how long do you practice for? And he goes, at least 6 hours. It's like, geez, after all these years, you still have to practice 6 hours. And he goes, oh, yeah, absolutely. And he said, what do you practice? And he goes, I do a lot of scales. Some real basic stuff. He goes, really? After all these years? And he goes, I guess it's like taking batting practice. You have to really have that sense about you. Like, if you think something, you can just play it, or you can just do it. You don't want to think about what you're doing. You just want to do it. Okay? And to me, that's what understanding structure is all about. It's not about portfolio or anything like that. It's about the power of the decision. Can you make really good decisions? And do you feel really good about them? Or are you avoiding the things you don't know? Or are you avoiding what you think? Well, I don't know. I'm thinking a lot about some of the decisions I made early on in my career. And it's like, well, I think sometimes I made decisions based on what I knew and what I didn't know. And once I got brave enough, like, well, you know what? I don't know that, so I'm going to learn it, you know. And it's amazing how it always came back to real basic foundation stuff. It's like, you know what? I think I need to work on certain bits of my drawing. Or how do I lay in that painting? And what am I really looking for? And it would come back to some fundamental things, okay? So I've got my background down in this painting. And now I'm adding some darker darks to the shadows, okay? And those darker darks are going to give me some depth, and it clarifies my drawing, okay? It really does. It clarifies the drawing a little bit. Now this guy's got a little bit of gesture. Okay, it's starting to work. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit of a darker dark there onto his jacket, or whatever it is he's wearing. Yeah, it's a jacket. That's a pretty big collar there. Okay, so we're gaining a range of value here. We've established a bit of a warm-cool relationship with the background, and we're gaining a little bit more depth into darks. I'm softening that back edge so it doesn't get too distracting. Your eye responds to the mark, something I said a lot in my other DVDs, and it's really true in that if I put down a really sharp mark, my eye just focuses on it. But if I soften a mark, like I just soften the back part of that jacket, you see it, you feel it, you know it's there, but you're not fixated on it. Your eye will travel somewhere else. Okay, so in the end all, with your painting, you have control over how we view everything. Okay, I'm starting to mix up some color for the light side. Okay, notice how I started with a pure color and I just start dulling it back. Keep readjusting, rethinking, and the whole time I'm looking at my painting, thinking about how that color is going to sit on there. I always try my best to mix up a generous amount of paint. There's nothing worse than running out of paint. You know, certainly you could always remix, but it's like, boy, it feels sometimes like taking several loads of stuff up and down stairs. It's like, boy, could I just make one big load? Take the elevator. Okay, so I always mix up tons of paint so that I try not to run out. And what I did was I mixed up my average color and value for the light side. And I'm just going to block it in over the whole light side. So I'm thinking, okay, where's light? And wherever there is light, I'm just going to put that in. I'm not overthinking it. It's a starting point. Okay, and I will mix color into this field. Okay, so little highlights on the ears there. Okay, highlight on lower lip. Hold that lower part of the face. His chin all gets light. Okay, so we've got our shadow established as a value with a dark accent. We've got the background established. Now I'm going to take that damp brush and I'm just going to soften a few edges. Soften the brow, soften the cheek. I already softened around the hairline. The nose as it transitions. Soft, soft. Okay, now take notice as I build up this painting, I'm always either painting in the light side or the shadow side. I'm always very, very aware of what color I have in my brush. Okay, all the soft edges. Yep. Okay, now I'm going to actually add a little bit of color into that halftone. The halftone meaning the areas in light that are not highlight, that are transitioning away from the light, like just before the shadow, like right there at the nose. Boy, he's got a red nose now. Okay, right there in the cheekbone, the lip, chin, that little part of the ear there. So each step leads me to the next step. So I put down that average, and it's helping me to see where I'm going to put color. Okay, right there, okay, right in through there. Once again, the beauty of the gouache is that once you get the material down, you could take a clean, damp brush and blend it out. See, so I'm now mixing the paint together that was already on the board. So I put down that average, I put down some color, now I'm mixing them together right on the board, see? Okay, as a form turns under, it might cool down, especially if this guy wants to have a little bit of a 5 o'clock shadow here. Okay, so I'm basically mixed the same value but cooler, and I'm adding that to the bottom. So the whole time here as I'm painting this stuff in, I'm squinting my eyes and I'm looking to make sure that that value is it's pretty much identical. Okay, so it's just a temperature shift. Okay, then I just blend it together right on the board. See how that worked? Okay, get it up a little closer now. Getting a little further along with the painting. Let's start working up into some of those lights. Now, if I want some color harmony, I'm going to mix right into those colors that I already mixed, but just go lighter and maybe make a few adjustments. Okay. Initially started mixing up and it had a little bit of that cool color in my brush. And once you see that, it's like, well, it's going to get muddy in that light side, so I cleaned off the brush and I'm remixing. Okay, this is just a small round brush. Always establish that highlight first. It just helps me. It's like, well, I can see the form of the nose. It is coming forward. Okay, I'm highlighting right up against the cast shadow edge right there. Okay, the nose is definitely coming forward. Nice highlight on the lower lid. Highlight on the upper lid. Right up against the cast shadow from the lower lid. Bring out the cheekbone just a touch. And once again, I'm just getting material down. Highlight right up against the cast shadow. All right, I'm bringing out that corner of his head. Now, if you think about it, if his head is, let's say, like a box, got a box for a head. He's going to have a front to the box and the side of the box. And right where I'm working right now is the corner. That is right where the cheekbone is. That is the corner where it says that
on one side, on the right side, is the front of his face, and on the left side is the side of his face. And I would say right above it, right on the forehead there's a corner there too. So as I bring up these highlights, I'm very aware of the corners. The nose has a corner. I put a highlight right on the corner of the nose. Okay? And that shadow on the upper mouth from the nose kind of pulls out that corner of the face as well. Okay, so understanding the basic shapes really, really is a big, big help in all painting, not just head painting, all painting. Okay, softening some edges. And working through some of those transitions. Reestablish that highlight on the ear there. Had it established before, but when I put in the color for the halftone, I painted over it. But, you know, it's part of it. You kind of put it in there, and it's part of a value drawing that you set up, and then you make adjustments, and then the final word is bringing the highlights back again. Like this nice highlight on his lower lip. Highlight there on the chin. Help give some perspective to his face. Okay, remember to soften those edges. And when I'm softening the edges, I'm barely dragging that brush through. Okay, a brush is a very delicate tool. It's got these nice, fine little bristle hairs on the end, and I see people just manhandle them. It's like, you know what? You're not cleaning a car battery. You're just very delicately adjusting some very fine pigment sitting on top of a paper or canvas surface. It doesn't take much. Okay, now I'm just making these small adjustments. So I started out very fast and loose. I started out with some large shapes, big shadow shapes, big light side background, just the jacket in general. And now, at the end, I'm slowing down. I'm working on small shapes, little tighter marks, adjusting little transitions, soft edges for the form shadows, hard edges for the cast shadows, just making these little adjustments. Okay? But it's all part of making the transitions through the picture. Nice little highlight there on the lower lid on the other side. For some reason, I like painting these guys and their faces are all messed up. They got their ears on sideways and one eye's up, one eye's down. It just seems interesting to me. But you know what's weird is that when I walk around and I look at people, I actually do see people that look like this. Oh boy. Hopefully I don't look like this. Okay, so as I'm working into the features here, notice how those areas feel like they're in focus within the context of the picture. Notice how the chin kind of gets softer. Notice how the back of the jacket really softens up. Like that far ear, there's not a whole lot of detail there. You don't want it bending forward. You want the nose coming forward. So as I progress through this picture, I'm really thinking about not just how to paint an eye or how to paint an ear, but I think about how do I want to paint that within the context of my picture. Okay, where do I want it to sit in space? How do I want form to read? Okay, making little adjustments. So that far side of the forehead there, just kind of soften that edge. Bringing up a little bit more light on that far cheek. A little bit more light there on the forehead, just to make a little bit more separation. Notice in the beginning I used bigger brushes. Now at the end I'm using some smaller brushes. It's amazing. I remember when I was learning how to paint, I felt really comfortable with exercises like rendering. I loved rendering. Why? Because I think there was absolute answers, like just make it look real. It's like, oh, okay. Wow, so if I just took my little brush here, the little brush with like 3 hairs on it, and I just spend forever, I can make it look as tight as I want. It's like, yep, that's what you got to do. So go ahead, go knock yourself out, render like crazy. And I'd go, okay. And for some reason that felt comforting because I found a little bit of security in knowing that if it looked real, it was right. Okay, then the next day I'd go into my painting class, and one of my favorite teachers, he would come up to me and watch me paint over my shoulder, and he would see me with a really small brush in the beginning parts of the painting, and he would say, "So what are you using there?" I say, "Oh, this is my favorite brush. I use it in my rendering class, and wow, it's really great. You know, if I spend forever, I can make this look really fun and really great." And he goes, "Yeah? Can I see your other brushes for a sec?" I said, "Sure." And I'd open up my little toolbox, and he'd pull out my biggest brushes, like maybe one that's like 1 inch wide, you know, a couple of those, and maybe that's it. And he'd just say, "Here, just use these today." And he'd take my other brush away from me. I'd say, but I can't render now. I can't get in there and put all that little detail in there. He goes, "Well, you'll have to figure it out." And he wouldn't tell me anything more, and he'd just make me work. And I remember I would just stare up at our model, our subject, working that day. And I'd just be a little bit confused at first, like, geez, what do I do? But then I started thinking about it, going, you know what? It's kind of like rendering, except, okay, if I was to render something and I used 1,000 strokes, with this brush I have to edit out about 950 of them. So how can I say the same thing with just 50 strokes? And I just sit there and look, and I started editing. And I started thinking about how these big brushes see big shapes. And maybe it's not just about going in there and noodling detail. Maybe it's about understanding light, understanding how you develop a painting, how you bring it up. Made a lot of sense to me. Okay, so notice how I'm transitioning through this painting. I'm ending now with the small marks at the very end. Okay, I'm adding some reflected light here to the shadows. I'm pretending like there's this green glow coming from the lower left, and it's illuminating the bottom of the nose and kind of coming up into the eye sockets a little bit and onto his lip, a little bit on his chin there. Any surface, as the form turns under, I'm adding a little bit of that green, and it's giving us a little bit more form, a little bit more shape. Yeah, so it's really interesting. When I was all done with art school, certainly I owed that one teacher a debt of gratitude. But at the same time, the value of learning how to render was huge for me, because I gained a confidence of making things look really, really finished. Okay. And then it gave me this confidence, like, well, you know what? I understand form now. And when I really pursued painting more, the editing really came natural after a while, you know, but it really did also help a little bit of prompting from my teacher to just take away my little brushes, which I, to this day, owe him a debt of gratitude, because that helped me out so much. That one day, that helped me out so much. But as I'm working now, you know, I've learned to really relax quite a bit. It's like, well, you know what? If I don't like it, I'll just paint back into it. It's not that big a deal. I could always tighten it up at the end. Okay, and even now I'm still softening things up. Look at this. I'm softening some edges here, getting the hair to go back. Now, I didn't really render the hair. Hair is the kind of thing where you just want to feel it anyways, in my opinion, at least within the context of this painting. So I left it as a shape, just a few dark accents, and I'm just softening the back edges so the face comes forward and the hair goes back. So even though I didn't go in there and render a bunch of detail on the hair, it still has some form. Okay, just like the jacket. The jacket has form. Okay, even that little transition from the face to the hair, softening that just a little bit so that the eye comes forward, the nose comes forward, the important stuff comes forward. Let that stuff go back. Okay, just softening. And that's just, once again, a clean, damp brush. And every time you see my hand and my brush go out of the picture, I'm pushing it in water and drying it out and cleaning it off. Because otherwise, if you just keep dragging that same brush around, you just start smearing paint throughout your picture. Okay, you have to make sure that that blender brush is very, very clean. Okay, give a little bit of a highlight there on that jacket. Get it to come forward just a touch. Soften. Okay, by softening with the gouache like this, it blends that color with the other color, and immediately they harmonize. So now those highlights are definitely part of that jacket. I'm just taking some dark and simplifying that bottom area. I was asking myself, do you really want people looking at the chin? Do you really want people looking at the chin? It's like, well, your eye responds to the mark, so if you don't, simplify it. So I just simplified it. A little bit of color right there, just in that transition. Okay, because that's the corner. Right there. That's the jawline, that's the corner, so it's got to turn right there. Okay. All right. So even though this guy really doesn't have much of a chin, he's got one of those faces that just kind of integrates into his neck. He just has a really long neck. His neck goes all the way to the top of his head, but we'll give him a little bit of a chin there, and that's where that color is. So just by changing that intensity of color right on the tip of the chin helps turn the form just enough. Okay, what I'm doing now is I'm taking just a little bit of really, really thin down yellow, and I'm just going over some of those white highlights just a little bit, just to warm them up, just a touch, so they don't look too pale. Just making subtle, subtle adjustments to the color. Throughout the course of the painting, I'm always reminding myself, it's like, okay, I started out really general, just light side, shadow side, average for the shadow, average for the light. And as you go on, you just keep splitting the difference, And within the course of the painting, like what I'm doing right now, I keep making little adjustments to that light side. And when you have a strong light source like this, the light side really is the star of the show. Even though I put in that reflected light, it's so close in value with what was already there. It basically pushes the form a little bit, but it's still the light side that does most of the work. Yeah, and give a few little highlights in his hair. Poor guy. Had kind of a brown helmet before that. Okay. Soften a few edges a little bit. I think that's pretty much it. There's always little adjustments. Okay. I'm looking at it. Let's take one final look at it here. And there we go. A little bit of a close-up. You can see how a lot of that color blended together, and that little bit of yellow right at the end just kind of warmed up some of those highlights just a touch, except for the extreme ones right up against the cast shadows. Okay. A little bit more color than that. I see it right there. I want that lower lip to push out just a little bit more. There we go. There we go. As you're doing painting and you're doing drawings, even if you're doing drawings, it's good to get up and get kind of a distance look on your piece. Okay, so as we zoomed out there, at first I was thinking, you know what, I think I'm just about done. But you know what, as we zoomed out and I looked at it again, little touch-up stuff. Okay, it's really important not to just stay too close to your work. You have to kind of get a view back a little bit every once in a while. it's a good habit to get into. Just those little soft edges. Much better. Much better. Okay, let's do another one. Starting it out fast and loose. Once again, just working on the whiteboard. And just like to feel my way through it. If you guys haven't watched my DVD about head drawing, it might be a good idea just to kind of brush up on that before you get into the painting, just because you'll see me do a lot of really fast drawing, and then if you look at the other DVD where we get into just value painting, monochromatic painting, you can see how I really practiced and showed how to practice bringing up the line drawing into painting. But that's why, as you look at this this little drawn sketch right here, and I start to turn it into a painted sketch, I'm starting out so loose. But here I go. I'm going to draw with the shadow, indicating my dark. Okay, now when I picked up that dark, I'm really just staying in that shadow side. I'm just really trying to indicate some darks. Okay, I try not to put that value all over, and I will be putting a wash of burnt sienna over this to kind of soften things and such. But notice, like, if you look at the nose, I didn't start outlining the nose all over. Get the shape of the hair in there. Okay, always go for the easy stuff. He's wearing like a dark coat or anything like that. Just block it in as one value. Just get it in there as a shape. Find that helps compositionally as well, because then immediately you're stacking blocks. It makes it easier to see how the values group together. Okay, let's take some transparent burnt sienna. Now, why burnt sienna? Well, you can use pretty much any color, but since we're working into the flesh tones here, it's a great starting point. And I think that part of it's obvious. But if you look at old masters paintings, this whole notion of working over this warm ground like this has been around for an awful long time. And this is nothing that I've certainly invented. I've totally picked up on it, studying other paintings and learning from studying other paintings in classes. And this has been around for a long time, and it can be used in a lot of different ways. But the way that I'm using it is pretty tangible. Okay, so let me explain that real quick, because I did it in the last painting, and I'm doing it right now. I'm getting rid of the whiteboard. Okay, I'm getting rid of the whiteboard. And by doing so, now the board is a medium value. So we can look at this medium value, and things are either going to be lighter than that value or darker than the value. So judging value becomes immediately a lot easier because we have a reference point. When you have a whiteboard, everything's darker than white except for white itself. So guessing value, you're really guessing. Versus this, at least cutting it in half, it makes it a lot easier. Okay, the second thing is we put down that orange. Things are either going to be a lot warmer or a lot cooler than that tone. Okay, so I'm putting down that blue. It really looks blue next to that orange, right? Next to the dull burnt sienna orange. Okay, and this is going to help our guy here to come forward. Because then all of a sudden we have a relationship of figure to background. And just to see that value, just to see that shape of the background is a huge help. It's not about rendering the background, it's about putting in tools that will help you see things better later. Like just, okay, by putting that background in, it's going to actually help me mix color on this guy's face. It's going to make my life a whole lot easier. Because immediately now, I have a picture. Just like that. There's a guy against the background. There's no detail yet, but you know, that's what developing the picture is all about. Okay? I touch it up. It's amazing how that neutral gray I was mixing up definitely looks bluish next to that guy. All right. Yeah, bluish. It's interesting. I still think like that. When I was in art school and I'd take like a color theory class, I remember we'd have to do exercises and our teacher would be looking at what we did, and I'd have, let's say, maybe two blue swatches next to each other, and she'd be saying, this one, it looks bright yellow to me, and that one is a screaming red. Can you see that? I was like, no, they look like blue swatches to me. And I was trying my hardest. I remember I'd get a headache in class. I'd be staring at these swatches going, oh my gosh, maybe I'm nuts. Maybe she's nuts. No, more likely I'm nuts. I just felt really awful, like I don't get it. And then finally I was in a painting class, and we're applying now this theory to painting. And I'd be mixing up colors. My teacher would walk by, and he would say things like, okay, Bob, can you see that blue there? It definitely shifts to the red. It's very purple, okay? So I'd mixed up a pure purple, and he said, not literally purple, okay, just purplish. I was like, oh, the influence of, the hint of, okay, I get it now. So after that day, actually, I took gray out of my vocabulary of mixing, and I always thought of everything as a color. What is that? Oh, it's a very dull, dull, dull blue. It's a very dull, dull, dull green. And what I found was I just needed to learn how to train my brain and my eye to see color. And suddenly, after that, my eye became a lot more sensitive, and I started to really learn how to compare, but I had to learn how to put myself in a position to do well. I had to learn how to set up my painting so that I had the tools in place to be able to see the right things at the right time and to see what I really needed to see in a sensitive way. And if it happened to be color, well, putting in these big shapes like the background really helped out a lot. Okay, so in our painting here, I put down my average for the shadow side now, and now I'm starting to add a little bit of color into our halftone. Okay, and it always looks a little bit harsh right at first. Okay, but remember that, we can come back in and blend some of that material together right on the board. Okay, and I'm going to do that. So right now I'm just trying to get material down. And then we're going to do a little bit of blending. All right, well, since I got the brush in my hand, let's just put all the halftones down. So it's going to go cooler on the bottom part of his face. Lighten that up a little bit. There we go. I always find that, okay, I'll make my best guess when I'm mixing on the palette. And if I'm off, I'll put down a couple strokes. If I'm off, I've learned just to stop, remix, then start over. Okay, versus, I remember before, I'd go, maybe it's correct, but I just don't know it's correct. And I just keep painting with it, and I would just, geez, what was I thinking? Okay, if your intuition tells you, it's like, you know what? That's too dark. Stop, look at it, and evaluate it. Okay? All right, now I'm taking that damp brush, and I'm just blending together the material that was there. Okay, and you can see, okay, the harshness is going away a little bit. Okay, just let it blend with that average. If you're painting with oil paint, you can take this exact same strategy because the oil paint stays wet. and you can blend right into it. So you'd mix up a big pool of average color, then you can just adjust right into it. Now, something I always say to my class is that I do want to make clear as I'm talking through this DVD, which is this is one way to do it. There's an infinite amount of ways to do it, meaning, painting like this and painting people or painting anything for that matter, even color. The best thing to do, if I were you guys, is to try as many different ways that you can. You can try this, and maybe you'll have some success with it. Maybe it'll make sense to you. Maybe you'll try something else and it'll make more sense. But the main thing, though, is that you're making decisions, and they're decisions based on experience. Okay, and I think that's the most important thing. And, this works, but other things work too. There's no one way to do this. Okay? The only absolute is what you think is right. Okay, so that is something you have to find. Just be careful that what you think is right isn't based on avoiding what you don't know. Really try stuff. Be brave. Try it. See how it works. Okay? I think, for all of us that do visual stuff like this, the biggest learning component that we've had has been experience. You just have to try stuff, and you can't be afraid of making mistakes, And if you're trying, to me, how can you be making mistakes? You're moving in the right direction. That's just part of it. I'm readjusting his wardrobe here. I didn't like what he was wearing. Okay, just adjusting a few darks here to get the form to read. Okay. Oh, he's got giant ears. And the giant ears are just easier to paint. Okay, add a few darks there in the hair. Give a little bit of depth. And once again, just getting the material down. Then I'll soften. What you can't see, it's out of view here because we're so busy looking at the painting itself, is the whole bunch of brushes that I have off to the side and the big bucket of clean water that I have. And I'm always really careful not to let that water get too dirty, because if I really want to mix pure color, if I have dirty water, it compromises everything. So keep an eye on that, okay? And as you do a lot of painting, think about it. If you have one brush, that one brush, unless you're getting it perfectly clean every time, all the paint will mix together. If you have two brushes, then you could say, well, I'm going to use one for lights, one for darks. If you've got more than two brushes, you can start allocating, saying, I'm going to use these for warms, these for cools, this is for my darkest dark, this is for my background. Maybe this one is kind of worn out, so I'm just going to use it for softening edges. And I find that the more brushes you have, the better. Okay, and I'm not saying go buy like 50 brushes right now, but as you gain interest, know that as you buy an extra brush every now and again and you start adding to your collection, it really, really helps. And I find that it helps having at least a couple brushes that are in really good shape to describe the hard and soft edges, especially the hard edges. Soft edges, you could use a little bit more worn out brush, but to get a hard edge, like what I'm doing right now, if that brush was worn out, oh boy, it'd be a real pain in the neck. Yeah, when I used to do a lot of like illustration work, I would buy new brushes before every project. It was just, relative to the project, it was kind of a cheap, easy thing to do to guarantee the fact that you had good materials to work with. It totally made sense, but this is the funny part. I never throw out any brushes, so I still have all those brushes. I've got like stacks of them, just piles of them. But when I start working, it's just real easy. I just grab a whole bunch of them and I just lay them all out, and I don't really have to think about it too much. I just start grabbing brushes and start softening edges, and it makes life a lot easier. And I would say the same thing for oil paint. I remember one time the official chemist from one of the big paint manufacturers came to the school where I teach, and he did a lecture about the materials themselves. And, hardly any students showed up, but all of us instructors that were there, we wanted to ask all kinds of questions. And we were asking questions about thinners and what works better with what and different things like that. And certainly some of the questions about, just how dangerous some of the chemicals are of just, using mineral spirits and paint thinner or, turpentine, things like this. And he said, you know what, you can save yourself a lot of hassle just using that stuff to clean your brushes, and then just use a lot of brushes. And when he said it, we all looked at each other like, well, I guess we kind of do that already. I don't really open up my thinner jar all that often unless I really need to, use it. Other than that, I'll just keep the lid on. But, just keep out a lot of brushes. And I thought about it going, you know what? I do that in all the painting that I do. I have all kinds of brushes out. It just makes my life a lot easier. See, so right now I'm just using a blending brush. I'm just coming in and softening some edges and allowing that really harsh light that I just put in, those highlights, to blend with that average tone that I had put down earlier and some of those half-tone values that I put down earlier. Okay, makes life a lot easier right there, just like that. So it's just little touch-ups, little adjustments, making certain things read faster and certain things reading a little slower. I'm slowing things down by softening some edges. I think oftentimes when we make decisions in a painting based on, how well we know how to paint something, like I'm going to render that eye, I'm going to render that hair, I'm going to render that ear because I know how to, so I'm going to. But does it make for a really good picture? Because a picture is all about harmony, so it has to kind of all work together. And so if within the context of your picture, the ears or the hair are, let's say, a supporting cast member, then you kind of have to treat it as such and say, you know what, can't make it too important because it might start dominating my picture. Okay? So I find that if I start really fast like I did, block everything, and I give myself a really clear strategy as to what I'm looking for and when I'm looking for it, I develop it as I go, slowing down as I go, looking at smaller and smaller things like I'm doing right now with these little highlights here in the nose. I find that I can make decisions as to what I want to read faster or more clearly because I'm going to spend more time on it, and I'm going to really develop that. And some of the other stuff, I might leave almost the same as when I just laid it in, okay, and which is fine. Because then you see it quickly, you feel it, it represents its space and its place within your picture, but it doesn't dominate the picture, okay? So I'm reestablishing some highlights, making sure that we can really feel like that light source is coming from the top, and our highlights now gradate down from the top down, but I need to soften some of those edges. So the eyebrows right there, soften. Right in and around the nose right there, right where the form is turning, to soften a little bit. Okay, I'm trying to figure out what marks I need to do next. Okay. Remix that green and just touch up that little bit of reflected underneath the nose. See, so I started out fast, and now I'm really slowing down. I really want to not assume too much. I always kind of try to look at it with fresh eyes when I look at it, and I try to think, okay, what needs to be touched up? And maybe you get to a point where it's like, you know what? I don't think anything needs to be touched up, and I'm done. That's it. That's it. Okay? But doing a painting like this, it's like taking a little bit of a journey. You have to be willing to kind of take you where your gut takes you. But if necessary, you might find yourself going back to another area and just kind of moving around. Okay, which is exactly what I'm doing. I'm just looking at the whole thing, making little adjustments. Yeah, that ear, just maybe that value gets a little bit stray out there. I want to touch it up. That highlight right there, soften that edge. That transition to the hair, right there at the hairline, just soften that edge. Feels a little bit harsh. I want the texture of the highlights to come forward. Okay, even that back part of the hair there, soften. See, now there feels like there's a little bit more perspective. The top of the head, as the hair goes back, it really softens. You don't really focus on it too much. It's always this balancing act. My eye is always bouncing back and forth. I look at that highlight on the lower lip, the highlight on the nose, the cast shadow from the nose onto the upper mouth. These little things and how they pull forward relative to other things going back. And it's this push-pull game. I start thinking, okay, now what do I need to pull forward and what do I need to push back? Maybe I just need to get a little bit more form around him, like there on the jacket. Just real simple stuff. A little highlight, a little gradation on the shoulder, little bits of stuff, just so that comes forward and it gives some dimension and gesture to the neck, because I totally simplified that lower part of his face. Okay, just a little bit of color. Okay. Soften that upper lid. Felt a little bit harsh. The other one too. That upper lid. Yeah, there we go. There we go. That upper lid was competing with the highlight on the forehead, right on the brow. And to keep the eyes in the sockets, I always have to be a little bit careful. But I want to just touch up that cast shadow edge so that it feels like light is being blocked within the brow. The eyebrow casting a shadow onto the upper eyelid. Adding a little bit of dark underneath the lower lid just to pop those highlights just a little bit. Just enough to push that highlight. I think one area that people tend to overdo are the eyes themselves, and they get fixated with the eyeball. They start rendering the white of the eye, and it looks like there's a light source inside the head where just the eyes are glowing. And I think sometimes we get caught up with what we know is there rather than what really is there and how we see it. In other words, we know that there's a white of the eye. Well, it doesn't mean you pull out the white paint. Notice how I'm highlighting around the eye. I'm highlighting around the eye socket, the upper lid, the lower lid, the bags under the lower lid, the eyebrow. These are all around the eyeball. I haven't really done a whole lot to the eyeball itself, but the form is reading. And that's really what we see. The eyes are generally in shadow. Now, stuff like that, people can just tell you, but unless you actually try to paint it, sometimes you take that stuff for granted, you know? So this is what I mean when I tell my students that painting isn't about just putting a portfolio together or making a statement as to what kind of artist you are. Painting, like what we're doing right now, is a real exercise in observation. Because unless you try to interpret it into a visual language like this, you don't really understand it to that level. You don't really understand what you're seeing. I mean, you know there's a person there. You know they have eyes. Okay? But how do you see that form? How do you see that color? Okay. I think we got this guy just about done. Okay, notice how the light hits the strongest right up on top. All right. Good. Okay, let's start another one. On this one, let's try working on a dark board already. I've been working on white boards and I tone them back with burnt sienna. Let's just take a dark board. I'm just going to draw right into it with a brush, and I'm just going to play with the color on this one. Let's do a profile with this guy. Alright, so I'm kind of starting out just with a basic drawing. Kind of get the features in there, the basic shape. It's a starting point. And that's all I think about when I start out a painting like this. Okay, so the next step will be to block in the background. So here we go. Big brush to start blocking it in. Once again, just like with the other paintings, just to keep things consistent, it just helps us to see the whole picture. Suddenly then we're dealing with all four corners of the picture, and we can really see the relationship of this guy's head to the background. Makes life a whole lot easier. I'm all for making things easier. Okay. Right now I'm contour drawing, but I'm contour drawing by painting the negative shape of the background. How about that? So sometimes, once again, we get overly caught up with the tools. Drawing is with pencils or lines. I feel like I'm drawing a line right now, but it's that line is the edge of this value, so why not do both at the same time? Why think of them as being so separate? Okay. Locking them in there, and I always find that that is a great opportunity for me to correct my drawing. You know, at least begin to correct my drawing. I feel like I'm correcting my drawing the whole time. Okay, soften a few edges there, kind of clean things up just a little bit. Figure that's going to be the back of his head. I just want to know that it's in the right place. Don't want it to be a strong focal area, so I just soften that up a little bit. At least begin the process of softening it up. Okay. Get the big shapes going on here. Get the jacket in there. Just blocking in the big shapes. But even just by looking at these big shapes, we can start to make some sense of this. And it has some order to it. And I haven't even started painting up any form yet. Okay, so once again, keep that in mind. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I want to indicate more clearly some of the shadows. So I started out with just real basic drawings, drawing with a brush. Now I'm going to say, okay, well, I know where the shadows are, so let's just plop those in, because that's another way to correct the drawing. I'm going to correct the drawing now by looking for the shadow areas. Okay, the ear casts a shadow, the eye socket goes into shadow from the eyebrow there. Okay, the back of the head is round. The whole head is round, but as the back of the head goes round, it goes into shadow right about there. Okay, so we want to feel that. Okay, keeping it simple. Once again, each step kind of corrects the last step, or it accentuates it in some way. Okay. Okay, and what I'm mixing here is I want to start mixing up an average color and value for the light side, but with this one, I'm going to go cool with the light side. Okay, I'm going to go cool with the light side, and let's see what happens. Okay, so I'll determine the light is coming from above. And see, because I'm starting with that nice dark value, I'm just carving right into it. Okay, so it really does. It feels kind of like sculpture to me. I'm just carving right into it. And it's really helpful to be able to know when you're working in the light side and when you're working in the shadow side. I was just working in the shadow side, now I'm just carving out the light side. And it just makes it a whole lot easier to understand, easier to do. Now, certainly in this picture I'm kind of exaggerating color, but this kind of focus here of working cools in the light side reminds me a lot of, let's say, painting people with darker complexion, whether they be African Americans or somebody with a really good tan. As an example, some friends of mine, Polynesian, definitely, as I look at them, I'm looking at how light hits them. The core of their skin tone is very warm. Okay, so the shadow side actually goes warmer, and the highlights in the light side go cooler. Now, certainly this is an exaggeration. This guy's blue. But what I'll do is I'll pop some warms in the shadow, and you'll see how it will still kind of balance out somewhat. Okay? And it's an exaggeration of what that would be. Now, you can look at paintings, and you can just, look at people. You can look at your friends, whoever, as you walk around, and you can see how light hits people differently. Okay, it's really interesting. I remember being in a class when I was in school, and I might have made reference to this in one of my other DVDs, but I still remember it, where he just asked us, we brought in markers in the class, and he said, okay, everybody, I want you to pull out the flesh tone marker, and we all reach into our boxes, and we all grab something different. He goes, okay, now put down some marks on that flesh tone marker. And there is no flesh tone marker, so we're grabbing, red or yellow or orange or whatever the heck, and we're putting it on the page. And then he'd say, okay, now put your arm next to it. We would. And he'd say, is it even close? And we're like, no. We all started laughing. He goes, that's just a lesson, you guys. There's no such thing as flesh tone. Everybody's different, and you have to be observant enough to understand light and how light hits form. And we're like, oh, okay, you made your point. Right now, I'm concerning myself mostly with value. So as I'm going lighter and lighter, I'm thinking about form and value, and how I can accent shape, like I'm doing right now, by making soft edges softer by pulling that highlight right in the middle of a form. Okay? But right there, I'm making sure that my cast shadow edges are nice and crisp with a nice hard edge. Okay? I went over all the hard and soft edges quite a bit in the monochrome head painting DVD. That would be a really good idea to watch before this one. But, they're all so similar in their own way. It's good to kind of watch them all, because you might realize something from that one watching this one and vice versa. So it's all pretty well connected, and I'm going through a lot of the same processes, but expanding as I go. So starting with the drawing and then value, and now working into color a little bit. But notice how I'm really still dealing with color as a tool of value, meaning that value is still more important. Value is still more important. So I still put down the average value for that light side, and I'm working into it. Okay, so the approach here with the color isn't all that different as if you were painting somebody lit by moonlight, and it's very limited light. And so when you're painting light, and when you get into color, that's really what you're doing. You're painting the light. You're painting the color of the light plus the local color. So if, let's say, somebody is standing and staring at a sunset at the end of the day, and the sun it's falling on the west horizon going down, and it really warms up, and it gets this yellow-orange glow, and this person standing there has kind of a warmish cast of their skin, they start looking really reddish-orange, and it's because it's the color of the light plus their local color. If you were to park a red car there at the beach, right where the sun is setting, and that light is hitting that red car would turn yellow-orange red, because it's yellow-orange light hitting a red car. Okay? If you parked a blue car there at the beach and that light was hitting it, well, that blue car will be a mixture of that blue plus that yellow-orange. It's really interesting. You mix the two together. Okay? So let's say we're in a very limited light situation, like somebody's outside and they're lit by moonlight or something like that. I remember one of my teachers put it this way, and it really made a lot of sense. He said that, when you're surrounded by a lot of light, you can see all kinds of color. Okay, but if you took those same objects that you're looking at and all that light, and you were to put it in a dark room or a room without any light that's completely sealed off, and it's pitch black, are those objects still bright and vibrant? It's like, no, because there's no light in there. So everything is defined by light. So you can take a person and put him out into the moonlight, which it's dark, it's nighttime, there's hardly any light, just the light coming, from the moon, reflecting off the moon. It's like, well, maybe that person would be lit like this, because there'd be less color. It's really interesting how that works, but it makes sense when you really think about it. Now, what is consistent is how form is treated with the hard and soft edges. So I am highlighting right up against that cast shadow edge there from his jaw onto his neck so that it really does look like light is being blocked right there. But I'm also using that as an opportunity to highlight the neck so the neck feels like a cylinder and it feels round. Okay? All right, so the form is starting to turn on this guy, and it's starting to make some sense. Okay, now I'm going to push the warmth there in that underside. Okay, just so that it doesn't look so monochromatic, so that it kind of, and I'm exaggerating the color, certainly. As you can see now, there's more of a separation of light side to shadow side. Now, I had drawn with a value for the shadow side, and all I'm doing now is I'm mixing another color that is a lot warmer to the same value. So I'm just replacing value with value so that when I squint my eyes, it pretty much blends in, but it glows more. Can you see that? Okay. I find that there's a big difference between value and intensity. And a lot of times people get them mixed up. And an intense color, like if you look at the reds there on the palette, if you squint your eyes, they're pretty dark. You compare them to the white of the palette, they're on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being pure black, those reds are probably somewhere around 5 or 6. So there is a difference between value and intensity. So when you're mixing, you always mix for value first. Okay, and then you adjust for intensity. So as I'm mixing into these shadows here, it'd be easy for me to put the wrong value in there, and it looks weird. The shadow stops being a shadow. It's not the right value. I had the right values in already, okay? But then I just kind of readjusted for intensity. Okay, now I'm adding some darker darks, and those darker darks are going to make that little glow that I put in there feel like a reflected light, because then those darker darks are going to give more of a reference of how dark the darkest darks in the shadows are, and that reflected light of that red will definitely kind of pop a little bit. Okay, it's definitely moving along. And it's really simple. I mean, you can see I was mostly just thinking about simple shapes and form. Okay, let's kind of zoom in a little bit here. Now, as you can see my brush strokes, notice how I'm always pulling my brush strokes around the form. I'm always trying to stroke around the form, because if I stroke around the form, think about it, your eye follows a mark. Just like how we follow a road with the car, okay? Our eye follows a mark. So if I put my strokes around the form, much like how I would chisel around the form if I was going to sculpt this guy, my eye follows it and we understand the form. And it's pretty simple, but it works. Okay, so if you look at the forehead, and you look at the cheek there, you look at right around his chin and how the brush strokes are always wrapping around, okay, it helps us to understand this three-dimensional shape on a two-dimensional surface, just that extra little bit more. Okay, I'm pushing things a little bit now. I'm going to say, you know what, I was just talking about intensity. Let's push the intensity even a little bit more. Now, I'm keeping the value the same, but I'm just making it even more intense. And you can see how that's just going to keep glowing and glowing, but I have to be careful. If it gets too light, it's going to look wrong. It has to stay within that range. Okay, and I established that shadow as a certain value. Okay, now I'm just taking the color and I'm pushing it warmer and more intense. Okay, I'm also just taking this opportunity to just touch up contours just a little bit. And notice I'm not going around the whole head, just touching up little areas, just kind of steering just a little bit better, just saying, you know what, I'm gonna make that a little bit more clear. Okay, soften a little bit if necessary. Okay, but make it look just a little bit more comprehensive, a little bit more clear, make it feel a little bit more accurate. All right. I think we did some good stuff on this one. We proved our point of just maybe cool light and warm shadows on this one. Okay. All right, here's a drawing of me. No, just kidding. So I just made this guy up, and I wanted to play with just doing a character on this one. So we got this drawing here, and let's do a painting of him. Okay, I drew from my drawing, and I kind of transferred him onto this little board here, and did the best I could. Look at that. Okay. All right. Let's give this a shot. Got my same palette of colors. I'm gonna take my same steps that I've been doing all day with this DVD here, and I'm going to apply it to this guy. Now, he's not a human head as far as I know, but same rules apply, so let's give it a shot. I'm going to draw with my shadows here. Okay, we kind of sped this one up a little bit. Wish I could paint this fast. I still demo pretty fast, though. I mean, not that I'm bragging about it. I don't think that's anything to be proud of, but it's just that I've learned over these years as I'm teaching classes that if the demos last any more than, let's say, 25 or 30 minutes, I look behind me and nobody's paying attention. So I've learned to just keep it quick. It's like, okay, let's go, and then get people started. And that's really what I want you guys to do. I mean, watch this DVD and have fun, and hopefully it makes sense. And this is the kind of stuff where it's good to watch it maybe a few times, and so that you know what I'm going to do. You can kind of anticipate what I'm going to do, and then you got to just try it yourself. Okay, and I know that's true of my students as well. I can talk all day about what I would do, blah, 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 blah. But the truth of the matter is you kind of have to do it for yourself. Okay, so here we go. I got my darks of my drawing in, and now I'm just toning it back with this warm tone here. Okay, and I've used burnt sienna in the past. I'm going a lot more intense this time, just to prove the point that it's not about the burnt sienna. It's just more about the value, and it's more about just getting a tone down. Putting that filter over him so that we can now better judge color and value, more importantly value. Now that I have that tone down, I can really start to imagine what would be lighter and what would be darker within the context of this picture here that I'm going to do. Okay, he's ready. We're ready. Okay, I think the first thing I want to do, as usual, is put that background in there. And let's go real dark with it this time. Okay. This way we'll really just carve him out as a shape. Yeah, I remember when I was in art school and I was studying all this stuff. And I remember, at times, sometimes wondering, what am I working so hard doing? Why am I doing all this stuff? I mean, you tend to think about the destination so much. Like, what do I want to do? What kind of painter do I want to be? What kind of artist do I want to be? What is this? Why am I doing this? Is this even necessary? And I'd always have to remind myself that, what? If I really knew, I wouldn't need to go to art school, I wouldn't need to study or ask these questions, So I learned a little bit like, well, you know what? This is kind of like traveling. If I grew up in my same hometown and I never left and I just made assumptions about the world, that's all they would be, is assumptions. And I'd probably be too nervous to go anywhere or anything because, well, I claim I knew everything already and, whatever. But if you open up your mind a little bit and you say, you know what? Let's just try it. And you know what? If you don't like something, you could know where home is. Okay, and you could always go back. But if somebody said, let's go travel for a while, and if you were to go and you were to go to different places, you would say, you know what, I'm all the way over here. I might as well see what the locals do. What do they like to do? What do they like to eat? What do they like to hang out and do? That's like trying different things, whether it be painting or drawing or a different approach or whatever. Because my eventual goal, I realized, was I want to make my own decisions. I don't want to feel like I'm limited by what I know or what I'm afraid of or anything like that. And so I did. I kind of treated my education kind of like traveling, and I traveled around. And some places I liked, some places I didn't. Some places I learned to like, some places I realized I didn't like as much as I thought. And in the end, I did. I came home. And you have a different perspective once you come home and you say, you know what, now I could do whatever I want. It's my work. So as I'm doing this painting here, even though it's really not a measured human head, it's based on all the experience, based on drawing and painting from life and making all of those observational judgments and conclusions that I could have only gotten from just really having some really solid guidelines like what I'm showing you guys in these DVDs of what to do. It gave me such a solid starting point where, well, now I could just make this stuff up. I mean, you know, the heads on this DVD are all invented. I just kind of just made them up. But, you know, it didn't just come naturally to me. I had to really figure it out. It took time and practice. And when people say you got to pay your dues and you got to get some mileage, that's what it is. But if you really want to do this, it's not such a bad thing. It's fun. Practicing's fun. Learning how to get better is fun. Discovering new things is fun, just like traveling's fun. Okay, and then eventually you end up with a broader point of view where you can really make a lot of good decisions and you feel really free to make a lot of adjustments. Okay, now as I'm working into this guy here, and I'm moving that brush real fast, look at that. Notice how I put some more color in the halftones, okay? And also what I'm doing in some of these spots is because, you know, the gouache there is, it's not like acrylic where it dries up and it's like plastic. It just sits there. I can sometimes scrub some of the paint out like I did there, and now I'm adding color back in. Okay, now I'm reinforcing my cast shadows, my highlight there on the lip, a little bit of a cast shadow from that lip onto the chin. A little bit of a highlight there on that lower lid. I'm highlighting that eye there, just thinking of it once again like a billiard ball or a ping pong ball as a basic shape, like it's going to get a light source from a direction. And I try to reinforce that right from the beginning. Okay, his little upper eyelid there. Highlight on top of his ear. Okay, now I'm taking that clean, dry brush and I'm just kind of blending things together a little bit. Yeah. I've got quite a bit of material down already, so it makes sense to kind of move it around, get the edges to read before I touch it up too much more. Yep, right there, soften, yeah. That's been kind of bugging me, right back there. Soften that back edge. Let the eyes literally pop forward. Soften the side of the face just a little bit. Okay, I'm going to add some darker darks there to the background. I think that some areas needed to go a little darker there. Yeah. And it's going to help me clean up that contour just a touch, so I'm just touching it up. Okay, I'm adding some darker darks now within the face, and it's going to help me turn form, and it's going to help me see some of the plane changes. Okay, notice how I start out with that cast shadow of the upper lid, gives some gesture to the eye. See, even putting in that nostril there just gives some depth to that shadow. Now that shadow is basically a reflected light value, that initial lay-in that I did. indicating a little bit of a cast shadow from that upper eyelid. Okay, I'm going to soften that edge just a little bit. That eye was looking a little bit harsh. Although, what can you do? This guy's eyes are kind of harsh. Okay, I'm adding a few cools down on the bottom part of the face just to turn more of a transition from upper face, top of the head, to the bottom of the head there. I don't know if guys like this have 5 o'clock shadow. I really don't, but I guess it'll probably read that way with that cool there. But I find that getting your eye to move, getting space to move, it's a lot about gradation. Now, you can gradate value. But in this case, I'm kind of gradating the color. It's like I'm keeping that blue more to the bottom and going to keep it warmer more to the top, almost as if the light is coming from the top and it just kind of gradates down. Like sometimes I see people and they kind of get on autopilot, and they start painting ahead and everything looks good. They block in the shadows, they get the background going on, and then they mix up like an average for the light side, and they put that in, looks great, and then they start mixing up a highlight value, and they just stick it all over, and it just flattens out the head. And they say, geez, Bob, what did I do? And I said, well, if you were to do that again, and that's honestly what I always say is like, because there's always going to be another painting, so you kind of rethink it going, okay, if you're in this situation again, what would you do different? And it's like, well, think about, once you get to the highlights, let your eye focus in on all those highlights and think about it going, okay, well, where are the lightest highlights? Where is the light source coming from? And if it's coming from the top, let's say, those are going to be the strongest ones, and they will gradate down. So try not to be on autopilot and just mix up one highlight value and put it everywhere, because it will flatten out the painting. Okay, so I just gave him a red shirt. Why not? Okay, I'm putting a lot of color down, and I'm just looking for transitions between the colors. So I'll put the color down and take the clean damp brush and just kind of blend the material together that's already there on the board. Okay, just touching up a few shadows here. Okay, give him a nice highlight there on that lip. There you go. Get that lip sticking out there. A little bit on the chin, but even see, okay, popping that highlight on that chin, see how it gives that lower part of the jaw there some form, because that chin highlight pulls forward, and I kept the sides of his neck really loose, so it starts to give a sense of form. So as I progress through this little painting, I'm always trying to figure out where I can make it clearer, where I can put down little accents now, because now I feel like I'm just accenting. I'm not repainting everything. I'm just accenting and touching up. Where does it need it the most? And maybe where does it need it the least, so that I make sure that I don't overwork everything. And once again, do something like put the same highlights everywhere. Okay, I'm always thinking about how can I get these eyes to have more form? How can I get that lip to stick out? How can I get the nose to really protrude in a picture like this? Okay, pull out that highlight of the lower lid. Pops form immediately. Okay. Now the upper lid. And that seems to justify how the eyeballs themselves seem to be halfway in shadow a little bit, and they're just catching just a little bit of light. Okay, let's pull some of the form there in the face and highlight a little bit so that we can feel the transition from the nose to the cheek right there, the front of the face. And we can get a little bit of shadowing there from the lower eyelids onto the face. Nothing like the control of a new brush. I pulled out a new brush for this one here. I like that. Make sure that highlight is right in the middle of the eye, right there, so that it bends back and it tucks under. Okay, good. It's interesting. I remember when I was first learning how to paint with gouache, I think some of the paintings were really pretty awful because I was really trying to feel my way through it. But some of my teachers, who were really good teachers. They didn't overteach, they kind of guided me along and tried to inspire me, but they didn't try to force my hand too much, which I really have a lot of respect for. But they would just tell me, yeah, go ahead and try it, But they did some great gouache paintings, way back in the day. And I remember I graduated from my school and I started doing illustration, and I got this one opportunity to do this one piece, and I was just so thrilled to do it. And I had to really talk the client into letting me do it because it was totally different than what I was showing in my portfolio. But I wanted to do this gouache painting. I was so excited, and the art director that I was working with, she reluctantly gave me this job, and so I started working on it. And I did a sketch for her, and I sent it on over, and she was thrilled. She goes, "Oh, it looks great. You're right. You can do this. It's fantastic. We're so excited." And I said, "I'm so excited. You're excited. This is great. Thank you so much for the opportunity." And I just couldn't wait to get started. And I learned my lessons from school, and I learned that, okay, don't wait till the last second. Let's get started on this thing. So I got started on it, and I was so excited. I did a color comp, and I was so excited. I loved it, and I was going, great. I bought this really nice piece of paper, and I wet stretched it, and I was going to say, okay, I'm going to work this thing up. It's going to be great. She's going to be blown away. It's going to be so much fun. I can't wait. I get into my studio nice and early, and I start painting on this thing. And right from the beginning, it was the biggest piece of crap I think I had ever painted. It looked horrible. Oh my God. But the thing is, I tried to stay optimistic. I was like, okay. It's going to turn a corner. It's going to get better any second now. Oh, this is going to be so great. I painted all day, going into the evening, and this is gouache, so it just got thicker and thicker and ickier and ickier. And finally, I was just so tired. I was like, oh boy, I don't think it's going to get any better now. Well, I spent a lot of money and got this really nice piece of paper. I at least want to save the paper, so what I did was I took my piece, which I had wet stretched, over to the sink, and I took one of those green scrub pads that you clean pots and pans with, and I started scrubbing off the paint under the sink. But the interesting thing was it started looking better. It actually looked a lot better, and I resurrected it. I mean, I looked at it, I turned off the water, and I said, you know what, this has looked better than it's looked all day, and I just left it there, and I said, I'll just take another look at it in the morning. I came back the next day, I looked at what had happened, and it looked great. I touched it up a little bit. The art director loved it, and it was a piece that actually helped kind of steer my career a little bit into a direction that worked out really well for me. And it really taught me a lot. It taught me that, one, I can't plan everything out, and two, you kind of have to be able to roll with the punches and stay optimistic. So you build these things up. Maybe it doesn't go as planned, but, what do you do? How do you make an adjustment? Okay, so as I'm working into this guy here, I'm just making little adjustments. You see me paint things up, you see me paint them out, okay? You see me soften this, you see me highlight something like for a third or fourth time. I'm making adjustments. I'm always putting down marks, and I'm comparing to marks that I already put down, and I'm just trying to develop this guy as he goes, trying to just build him up, okay? And sometimes I'll paint all day on something, and I'll go, you know what? Let's change it. It happens. And sometimes it just looks better that way. Okay, so I think that we're all basically a collection of our experiences. It's important, though, to learn from those experiences in a very positive way, in that even what seems like the biggest mistake ever could be the greatest thing ever. You have to really kind of look at it that way. And if you can kind of learn to take on this bit of fear